let's talk about collections. Um, Many times in our programs, we want to represent bunches of things, right? Right now, how do we know to represent bunches of things? You need a bunch of strings. What do you use? An array, right? And arrays are really cool. They allow you to represent bunches of things, which is nifty. Now, um, what are problems with arrays? What would you like to do to arrays, right? How could you extend arrays to make them more useful? A stack or a queue, what's the difference? How is a stack more useful than an array? But what's right? That's kind of more restrictive in a way than an array, right? But what does it have and an array doesn't? How many elements does a stack have? Sorry? Infinite, right? You can grow it. How many elements does an array have? Well, once you start it, you have, right? So one thing that we could use to extend an array, right, is to allow stuff to be added to the array, to allow the array to grow. Does that make sense? Yes? The basic thing, the basic data structure that kind of allows an array to grow that behaves like that, the interface, we call it a list. And we'll see exactly how it works. Java doesn't have operator overloading, so the syntax is going to be slightly ugly. But on the other hand, it works kind of like an array, except that you can add stuff to it. Isn't that cool? Now, what's the other thing that an array has? What can the indices be? What are the indices of an array, always? Integers, right? Well, wouldn't it be cool if I could have strings as my indices, or tables, right? Or chairs, or whatever the heck I'm trying to represent in my domain, right? The structure that allows us to do that is called a map. And it allows us to associate things. It's almost like an array, except that my keys don't have to be integers. That's kind of the other extension. C# calls them directories, I think? No, I'm getting confused. Map. C# has a slightly different name for it. I think it's a directory. I may be wrong. The equivalent. Most everybody else calls them map. Dictionary, sorry, not C# and a bunch of other languages call them dictionaries. I think Python also calls them dictionaries. So we are going to talk about those things, about lists and about maps. Also, we have one thing. List is an interface. And I'm going to have several different possible implementations of list. And so we can see how that kind of stuff works. List is an interface that extends collection and iterable. Collection is kind of the highest level thing, has add for adding things to the array, and it has get. No, it doesn't have get. Add has size, has remove, and those kinds of things. And then iterable has the iterator thing, right? That we actually, the iterator method, which we defined, right? And the list, what a list adds by itself is this get and put. Get and set, sorry. Put is for the map. So, What does a list look like? Java REPL. The standard implementation, or the simplest, more useful implementations, an array list. New array list. Just like with an array, right? I need to specify what kinds of elements do I want. In the case of these collections, I use angle brackets because they use generic. So array list of integer L equals new array list of integer. I don't specify its size, right? I can do size, and that tells me how many elements are there. Right now, how many elements are there? 0, because I haven't put anything, right? I can add by l.add. If I ask l.size, what do I expect to get? 2, because I added 2 elements, right? Does that make sense? This grows. Isn't that cool? And then I can do l.get 0. That's the equivalent of kind of the square brackets, right? What would that do? Would give me 3, right? The first element that I added. And l.get of 1 would get me 5. And l.get of 2 would get me some sort of error, right? I can also put on 0, I want to put 234. It's not put, sorry, set. Maps use put, just to confuse you, because it would be too easy if they use the same names for everything. So if I do l.get 0, now it would get 234, right? What happens if I do this? I get an error, because I'm outside, right? I can probably do resize. No, I cannot grow the list. But I can do L equals new array list integer of 100. And this will have 100. Never mind. That doesn't work either. What can I do to my list to make it grow? I cannot. I have to do add. So I need to add a bunch of times to get it to be of any given size. And then I can use it sort of kind of like an array. Does that make sense? How is this the same as an array? The same concept, right? But what do I use here instead of the square brackets? Either get or put, or set, sorry, right? Depends on whether I want to assign or just to get the value. Does that idea make sense? And that's basically all I have on a list. I can also, so let me do l.add or for int I equals 0, I less than 10 plus plus I. So now L has 0 through 90, right? And I can also do the standard for loop. Or let's Ah. Don't you like? This thing does the wrong thing. Java REPL doesn't work for this. So let's do it with this, right? Today is the 27th. So let me add a new package. Thank you. Let's do by 5, and let's do like 1 to 10, right? And now I can either do int I equals 0, I less than L dot size, how do I print the ith element of that list? Get, right? Or I could do for integer I, or right, actually, does this idea make sense? Yes, it's all cool. It's the same as an array. You already knew it. Yes.
If you don't specify size, will it ever become full?
What do you mean if I don't specify size? No, whenever you add, it adds one more.
Okay, so
It would never grow out of space with big air quotes. When does it run out of space? Eventually, when you have no more RAM, right? Which is not quite true. Eventually, it would fail. It would probably take an obscene amount of time. Because besides RAM, what else do we have? Sorry? Yes, so you have virtual memory, right? So it would take a while. I mean, you can make it crash, but it would take a long, long time. We have mentioned this idea of generics, right? Arrays are a language mechanism, right? Whereas these collections are a library mechanism, there is nothing special in the language that knows about collections, right? So they came up with this idea of let's make something that people can do stuff like arrays all the time, right? And so they would do, they did this idea of generics. You have a type parameter that you put inside the square brackets, right? Last class we talked about boxing and unboxing, or last week, right? You cannot have collections of primitives. You have to have collections of objects. So your list has to be a list of integer rather than a list of int. Does that idea make sense? What kinds of things can you put in your list? Whatever you want, right? Whichever objects you defined or Java defined or anybody defined, right? The only thing you cannot put are primitives. Does that idea make sense? Any questions? Shall we?
Are those get and set? Are those methods or what?
They are methods, yes. They're just standard methods of the list class.
Can we have collections of collections, like array of collections?
Sure, why not? Let me see. Int. What we don't really have, we have arrays.addList. So let's do this. We don't have nice, well, actually Java doesn't really have nice initializer things, but we had braces that more or less, right? We can do this with an array. Int arr equal 1, 2, 3, right? Which is slightly nice. With a list, we can do arrays as list, and that will return a list, and you can pass here whatever you want. So there is actually a standard mechanism for getting a variable number of parameters, and so arrays.addList takes a variable number of parameters and returns a list. This arrays class is a class that has mostly static methods. So I could have, let me do L1. How do I define a list of lists? What do I expect to get here? What's ll.size? How many lists, right? What kinds of elements does SL have, right? LL has lists. How many lists does it contain? 2, right? Does that make sense?
So how to print the print 6, like how many total elements in the list?
How could we do it? But you don't know, right? you're not allowed to know whether it's L1 and L2, right? How would we do that? So how could we do int public static int get total number of elements if I'm passed a list of integer. How can I do it? Yes, right? I just go through all the elements in my list, right? And add up. So int sum equals 0. What's broken here? Is this broken? Yes. Which kind of for loop do we want to do? Iterable, right? We definitely want to do that. Well, it doesn't matter in this case, but oh, it's not element, right? It's what's this? List of integer, right? What do I do here? How many? What do I add? Is this okay?
Shouldn't be a nested loop.
I don't really need a nested loop, right? What do I want to add here? If that list has 10 elements, what number do I want to add?
Dot length.
The length of, right? How do I get the length of a list? Yes, it's size. Just to add confusion, just to add variety of the spice of life. We call it size, not length. Because the intern that was designing the library didn't know any better. That's what you get when you hire a new intern every year. Now, it's actually very, very hard to be consistent. And the Java library is huge and it's been developed over years by different people. So it's not the most consistent thing ever. List.size, right? So I could do also, oops. So now what would I expect to get now if I run this thing? 218, right? And now? Does this make sense? Any questions?
Array got as list that was exactly same. The performance of this one is same as the previous one. The first example we will show that was array list. That was just array list.
Wait. Array list is the name of a class, and we were adding directly. What this allows me to do, arrays.asList, is rather than having to do, I could do and then it's just that this has a bunch of lines. This one is one line. And it's,
You use method if you use in array.
sorry?
You will use method to add the numbers in
Yes. Arrays.addList is just convenient way to initialize stuff. I don't know if it's required to return an array list or if it returns a list. Yeah, it's basically, yes. It returns a list, but it's probably, we can do get class. And that tells me which class it is. It's not required to be an array list, but it's basically an array list. It is an array list. There used to be a vector class in Java that basically behaves the same as the array list. It's still there, it's just that now you should use array list. I think there is a linked list class that nobody ever used. Where's list? Array list, vector, and linked list. Oh. Oh, doesn't array list does the same? So maybe I want vector. Oh. Oh. So actually we want vector. But well, arrays.addList is nice. Do we want to go into the weeds of performance? We want to go into performance weeds and data structures and that kind of stuff. Yes? Let's go into performance weeds or not? Not today. Let's do it on Wednesday. Okay. There's kind of different ways that it could be implemented. Normally you don't care if you're just going to iterate over them. You don't terribly care. But and we would need to do really long stuff to get it, to be able to see the difference. And they also have is empty and remove. Now, maps are uber cool. Maps are like arrays, but we can do, we can use other kind of stuff. Actually, let me leave this one alone and create a new class called maps. How about that? Thingy. Ah. Let's do that. I can still do this. So let's do Sorry. Map of string to string. That's what I want. And my standard my kind of basic map is hash map. Ah, God, I sometimes hate you, Java. It's my fault, but I still hate Java. Arr. I'm gonna create something to initialize. Void initialize. I would need to make this static. There is unfortunately no kind of useful way of defining maps that doesn't suck. So we could use put, right? AL, what state is that? Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas. Okay, you don't have elementary school kids. Never mind. That's how they learn the states here. Alaska, Arizona. And that's it. I'm not going to put all the other ones. Put allows me to assign a key to a value, right? Then in here, I can do system. Oh, I need to call initialize states. And so this is working almost the same as an array, right? But my keys, instead of being 0, 1, and 2, are strings. AL, AK, and AZ.
Always the first.
The first thing is the key, and the second one is the value in a put, right? Now, so yeah, in fact, find a state class, right? So let me define my class state, right? That's only going to have a abbreviation, a name, and a population. I'm going to make everything public because I'm a horrible human being. So instead of making it a map of string to string, I can make it a map from string to state. And actually, I think newer version of Java are slightly nicer, and so they let you not put this thing. Here, instead of passing Alabama, what do I need to put? New state AL Alabama 10,000. I have no clue how many. What's the population of Alabama? Google. Alaska, Arizona. Okay. Alaska should have at least 7 people.
Still put the AL twice. AL. Because we are already defining it in state. The abbreviation.
Well, but the map lets you look at it faster, right? Basically, AZ, that is a good question. We should, because it's my example. No. Now, what would happen if I do this? I need to do name, right? What would this print? Alabama, right? On the put, the first thing is the key. The second thing is the value, right? Does that make sense? To your question, right? Should we have this map? Can I just have a list of states, right? If I'm storing the abbreviation in the state, right? Could I just have a list of states? The answer is, of course you could, but now how do you go find the one for Alabama? You need to go do a for loop, right? And go through potentially all 50 states if you get to what? Wisconsin or whichever one is the last one. Whereas this way, the map does it for you and does it obscenely faster. Does that idea make sense? For those of you who are taking data structures, which kind of map are we using? Hash map, what does this relate to? Hash tables, right? Which you'll probably see sometime soon. Not yet. Ha 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 ha, wait. More fun is coming. Hash tables have slightly cheating order of 1 searches. So they are insanely fast. Whereas if you have to go through everything, it's going to take you linear time. So if you have 50 states, it's going to take you 25-ish steps, right? You expect that it would take you about 25. Sometimes it's going to be 1 or 2. Sometimes it's going to be 50, right? So on average, about 25. With a hash table, it's going to be instantaneous. It's going to be super fast. With 50, it's still going to be super fast. But with 5 million, it's not going to be as fast. Computers are still really fast. But does that idea make sense?
Map is not public.
Sorry?
Map is not public, private, or something. It's just static.
Map is a class. My variable states, right? I'm not making it neither public nor private. What does it mean? By default is what? Not public, it's package level. So public to anybody in the package. On the other hand, that was more by laziness than anything else. I can make it private. Because nobody else outside this class is using it. I could also make it public.
It doesn't matter.
it matters to the variable and who is using it. Map is just another class, right? It matters when it matters, right? Does that make sense? What can I use maps for? All sorts of really cool things, right? Um, Basically, they are almost a database, right? I can go find it through this, right? And get whatever I want. They could allow me to do things like that with states and capitals and things like that. They could allow me to um, have people and search for people, have whatever the heck I'm looking for, right?
The keys are always unique.
The keys in a map have to be unique, right?
So in a university, our ID number, it can be one of the codes.
It could be, right? It could be the key if they are always going to try to find you by ID, right? It's not quite a database. Databases are incredibly cool, right? This is kind of an in-memory, really crummy database. Um, but for a university, right, they would probably have, if you were to keep every student in memory, which you don't, you use a real database, but if you were to do that, you could use the student ID as the key in the map. You could actually use, and I think that may be part of the assignment, you could have a list of students, right, containing all the 10,000 students or 20,000 students that we have in KSU, and different maps. So you could have a map for student ID, so you go search for student ID. You could have a map by last name, right? Now, and a map by first name and a map by major or something like that, right? Or by program or by, so you can go find the students that you need fast. What happens if you try to do a map by last name, right? Where it's not unique. What would you need to do?
We need other map again.
You need a map to what? Instead of a map from string to student, right? What would you do? So imagine that we have 10K, right? And we want to do, instead of states, let me refactor this. States by abbreviation, right? And then I could also have, let me do states by population, right? And then I'm going to do state AL equals new state know how to cut and paste. Right? Can I do the same for states by population? Or let's do AL dot population requires me to do new integer. Oh, wait, no. It's complaining because I lied. Right? What would happen? Can I search states with population 10,000? What am I going to get? Well, what am I going to get? I'm not going to get multiple states. I'm going to get one, the last one. Does that make sense? So if I print, let me actually I can just print this thing, right? What am I going to get here? Alabama. What am I going to get here? Arizona.
Arizona is with touch.
10,000. Please tell me that I'm doing the right thing. Sorry. Good catch. Does that make sense? The last one overrides. So that is wrong, right? I cannot have a map, right? Map maps by definition to one thing. So what can I do? I'm going to have states with the same population, right? What should my map be?
Abbreviation.
Sorry?
The abbreviation.
Well, I need to do it by population, right? I want to do it also by population. What can I do? What should I map to? I want to map, instead of mapping to one state, I want to map to what? A bunch of states. How do I do bunches? Well, for loop allows me to go through a bunch of things. How do I represent a bunch of things?
Array.
An array, that's one way.
Yes.
An even better way that we just talked about for the last half hour before maps. A list, right? So I could have this a map to list of state, right? And so this would now be, instead of AL, I would leave this arrays. Here, right, I would do isn't this cool? Isn't this complicated? Yeah, which makes it fun, right? So now you have a map from string to lists of states. Does this make sense? So this allows you to represent, right? Combined with objects, it allows you to represent tons of different things and search them really, really fast. What other things do we have for maps? Actually, normally, if you didn't pre-compute your stuff, right, you would just be going through this and saying, oh, do I already have a list for it? If I don't, then let me add a list with one element. If I do, then add to that list or something like that. Your logic for adding would be more interesting. But here we are cheating, right? One of the assignments requires you to do something like that. I can't remember if it's, oh, it is assignment 10, definitely. I bet you it is assignment 10. So, we have a couple of other things. What if I want to list every element in a map, right? Or every, well, then you get to say, wait, what do you mean by element in a map? What are the elements in a map, right? Well, you have the keys, you have the values, and you have the entries, right? So how do I list? Well, I could states by abbreviation. Sorry. What's going to be the elements of the keys? Strings, right? So if I get key set, I get a set of keys. Right? So it's printing Arizona maps to this, Arkansas, Alabama maps to that, right? Are they in order? No, right? Because they're hash table.
It's from the last value to
It happens to be, but it's more randomish because it's a hash table. It's not guaranteed to be in order. If I had made it instead of a hash map, a tree map, then it would be in order. Oh, no, it wouldn't be. Never mind, I lied to you. Oh, wait, it is, sorry. I didn't lie to you. I don't know how to order alphabetically. Oh, okay. I was like, they lied to me. This song had them in different order. But it's by order of the abbreviation, not of the state name. Right? I can also get the values. That's called values or value set, because that would be actually useful. We don't do the same thing. Oops, just and then if I want to, I can iterate over the whole thing, right? Where the entries in the map. What value are those things? They are a horrible thing called an entry. So I could go over map of string state map.entry of string state. Then I can do states or abbreviation dot entry set. See how they print. They are printing with equal signs. So that's another way to go through all the elements in your map. Is this cool or what? This is really cool, right? Please tell me this is really cool. In a way, with this, you now have enough knowledge to be able to represent all sorts of things, right? You can create your own objects, and now you can create lists and maps, and your objects may contain lists and maps, right? So you may have an object state, and your object may contain a list of cities, right? And those kinds of things, which means you can basically do whatever you want, as long as you only print to the screen. Yeah, in this class we will not cover, well, we may cover graphics or something like that, but not for the test or something like that. If we end up with a couple of weeks of extra time in the end, we'll cover stuff to get more practice on programming and kind of cover additional stuff along the way. But any questions about maps? Yes?
Do the elements of key, they can be only strings?
Mm-mm.
Anything?
They can be whatever the heck you want.
How about value?
Whatever the heck you want. For keys, there are slight things. There is 2 pieces of magic that I think get defined by default. But there is a hash code method that's inherited from object, and there is a comparator or compare, something like that, method. The first one, the hash code is used for hash tables and things like that, and I think that one is always defined. The other one may not be, so you may need to define a couple of methods. It is actually slightly convoluted how to define them, but these things will normally generate stuff. The idea of a hash table is actually a really cool thing. If you want to search, right? Imagine that you have an array of, you're going to represent people, right? So you're going to have an array of people, kind of sorted-ish by name or something like that, right? And you try to search with the name, right? What's going to happen is you need to go through every element in the array. Unless you had a magic function that will tell you the place, the bucket where that element should be. Does that make sense? That magic function is called a hash function. So what you do is you take a name and you just operate on it until you get a number, and you go put it in that place in the array, right? If you have a big enough array, chances are that there won't be many collisions. The problem is what happens if 2 elements happen to want to be in the same place. And there is all sorts of different algorithms for what do you do then. But if not, right, you could just almost magically find the right element at the cost of having lots of empty space. But So hash tables are magical, but you need a hash code. You need that function that takes an object and gets you a number.
How about entry?
The entry is defined by the map based on the key and the value. So an entry is always something that comes from a key and a value. You have dot get value and get key. Those are the two things that you can ask to an entry. So now we are printing it ourselves, and we'll see that we need plus signs. Cool.
If we have a queue and stack exactly like this, which use array access. For example, queue has DQ and Q1 for array.
Yes.
But when we use queue as an array list, then I'm not sure, but when we use queue as an array, define it as an array, then we have to use q dot add, q dot remove, and we cannot use q dot enqueue or q dot
Yes.
enqueue.
Yes.
Why is like that? Why it cannot use their own method when it's defined by array?
Because there is different. Wait, array list doesn't have enqueue and dequeue. Has add and remove.
Yes.
So if you want a queue that has enqueue and dequeue, you need to have a class that has those methods. Actually, Java has a queue class, several queue classes. You have a stack class. The other one that is actually important is the set class. Java has set classes that ensure that there is no repetition.
It means when we use stack or queue for as an array, then we have to use the array method.
What do you mean you use stack or queue as array? There is no such thing as that.
Define them. Define them. Yeah, like your list. List.
Yeah.
Equal new array list.
I can do stuff like stack of integer s. Is that what you mean? What do you mean? Then I have a stack. I cannot use it as an array. It's a stack. Right?
We cannot have a stack and an array inside the stack.
You could define your own stack class using an array. But that's different than this stack class, right? They may be using an array inside, but you're not supposed to know, right?
We have to define on queue or stack.
If you have to define your own, right, for like a data structures class, and then now what's your question?
Yeah.
If you were to define your own, then you would need to define those methods and figure out how to implement them. We may end up doing some of those things. Any questions? Yes.
So far we have used like as Boolean compare operators like less than or greater.
Yes.
So when we will use the single int?
The single int, that's a way to combine the definition, right? Rather than having you define an equal method and a greater than and a less than, you define just one method that returns either negative, positive, or 0. So when you define your own comparator, you normally want to define one method rather than 3. So that's why they make it that way.
So is it a Boolean comparator?
Sorry?
The single int?
The single int, no, it's not Boolean. It actually, what you want to do is, when you compare two objects, right, what are the possible answers?
True or false?
True, false, only if you're checking for equality. But if you're going to sort them, right? What are the possible answers?
Equals, not equals.
No, like 3 and 5. Which one goes first? Why?
It comes first.
So you have, right? You have more answers. If you're comparing 3 and 5, right? What you're going to tell me is which one goes first, right? So what are the possible answers when you compare 3 and 5? Either 3 goes first, or they are equal, or 5 goes first. So you actually have 3 answers, right? That Java defines the comparator method where you return -1 or negative, doesn't have to be -1, return negative, 0, or positive. That's for sorting and those kinds of things.
XOR. XOR.
It's not XOR. You're comparing things and saying who goes first. So there's only 3 possible answers.
Now, when do we use XOR?
When do you use XOR? Never. Sorry. When you're doing really basic, low-level stuff. Never. Ever. Use XOR in real life? Probably in Java? Never. I mean, you'd use it in C or C++ when you're doing low-level stuff. Java, when you're playing with encryption or something like that, normally never. You should know what it means, but it's not something that you use normally in Java.